Now I'd like to welcome and introduce our moderator for today, Kris Mayes. Kris.
Thanks, Jason, and welcome everyone. It's my pleasure to be your moderator today for this Global Futures Town Hall with Michael Crow and Dr. Peter Schlosser. Our aim today is to have an informative and forward-leaning conversation about that focuses on how this remarkable new laboratory got its start, but most importantly, how it can take the amazing work that GFL staff, faculty, and students are currently working and are going to do in the future to new levels of impact globally. I'm going to guide Michael and Peter through a series of questions that I have, but then we're going to turn quickly to questions that you have that were pre-submitted by you and that you are going to submit into the chat box. So without further ado, I'd just like to get started for this conversation with President Crow and Peter Schlosser. So first, for President Crow, for Peter, let's start with a pretty broad question, which is, why does the world need a global futures laboratory? Dr. Crow, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll start with this, and it sort of leads into what we're trying to do here. So advanced science-driven countries have been building laboratories for the last 400 years or so. In the United States, we've been building big nationally focused laboratories for the last 75 years or so. Most of those laboratories are related to defense-related activities and science related to defense and agriculture and space. And it turns out that those issues or those problems are a completely incomplete way of viewing the world. It doesn't appear that the government of the United States or the government of anywhere else is going to figure out how to build a comprehensive laboratory, using laboratory in the broadest sense, a discovery enterprise in all subjects, social, physical, behavioral, technological sciences, in all of those areas, that no one's going to step up and bring together the assets, the tools, the systems, the theories, the models. And so that means then, if you believe, as I do, that new ideas are needed, new solutions are needed, new technologies are needed, new ways of teaching and learning are needed, new ways of thinking are needed if we're going to have a successful relationship with this really complicated planet and our really complicated species. If we don't step up and build a comprehensively, broadly scoped knowledge creation and transfer enterprise, something that we're calling a laboratory here, we're going to fall off a cliff. And the distance that we fall off the cliff is unknown, but I can already sense, and many people can already sense, that it's not going to be a short distance, it's going to be a long distance, and the impact is going to be very hard. And so the Global Futures Laboratory is our attempt to do something as an institution to actually create a broadly scoped intellectual entity, as opposed to an intellectual entity also called the university, which is 1,000 points of light that may come together or not. Can we do that? Can we be the 1,000 points of light of the enlightenment and science and understanding and psychological understanding and human awareness understanding and all these things? But could we also organize ourselves differently to produce a different set of thoughts, theories, outcomes, tools, and devices? And so the Global Futures Laboratory is an organizational approach to knowledge creation that needs to be innovated, needs to be advanced, and we are advancing on that for those reasons.
Excellent, thank you. And Peter, could you take a crack at that? And then Dr. Crow, I want to come back for a follow-up on what you just said.
Yeah, from my perspective, I think it's everybody knows that since quite a while, definitely since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we have put pressure on all aspects of the Earth system, including the human domain, which is societal structures, social dynamics. And we are seeing increasingly that we are moving into a domain of negative outcomes. I mean, we're just looking around here, the area around Phoenix, and look at the last summer, we had heat records, we have a lack of precipitation, the monsoon is not there, wildfires, and that you could go, on and list phenomena around the globe. So we are actually feeling that we have made choices that put us into a domain where we have to find answers to decrease the negative outcomes. In my view, academia has actually a mandate from society to be one of the, if not the primary knowledge generator that will assure that society will safely move into the future. And so we actually not only understand where the pressure is, we also know how to intervene. And bringing that together is important. In order to do that, we see that many institutions around the country, around the world, are embarking on that line of inquiry, but many of them are doing it at a scale that is too small. So the Global Futures Laboratory is a structure that fundamentally supports one of the pillars of the university as a whole. It reaches into all aspects of what the university has to offer in terms of understanding, modeling, predicting, finding innovative solutions, moving forward and engaging with the public to address these kind of difficult problems in a holistic fashion.
And I guess this is, Dr. Crow, going back to something you said, and maybe for both of you, and it's something that I wasn't aware of before recently, but it does seem like this is not something that is being done, everywhere. It's a pretty, I can't say unique idea, but maybe it is unique. Can you talk about whether there are any corollaries anywhere else, whether you looked at any other types of corollaries or potential, structures, and why you chose this one in particular? And I think you've addressed some of that.
So one way to look there, the strongest corollary is the evolution of the universities that evolved medical schools. So they started largely as basically universities acquired medical arts training faculties beginning 300 years ago. They were people who were largely not driven by science. They ultimately, over time, brought in scientists, they brought in social scientists, they brought in engineers, they brought in other teaching and learning modalities, and they built not only medical schools, but they built health systems portfolios across the universities, many universities, and then they built over the last 300 years by integrating all these disciplines and integrating science and art and practice and building solutions and making things happen. They built something that had never existed before. Medical schools in their present form are powerful institutions. They create vaccines while at the same time treating patients. They create new visualization technologies, new understandings of chemistry, new understandings of biology. So they're both fundamental research places. They're teaching and learning institutions. So the best analogy that I have for the Global Futures Laboratory model that we're building is one where we're bringing together the practice of sustainability, the science of sustainability, the other sciences. We're bringing together 3 schools in the new College of Global Futures, like a College of Medicine with different departments and units and so forth and so on. And so what happened when the universities did this over the last 300 years is that it changed everything. It changed the outcomes of individual humans relative to their health and well-being, greatly and dramatically enhanced our ability for life extension. And the focus there, of course, is on the individual for the most part, until the public health schools were added to those portfolios, which was focused on the group. This entire focus is really focused on the group and its relationship with the planet. And so I don't like to use this analogy too much, because then I get back, every academic picayune response to this, which is, this is a medical school approach, a health sciences approach, an integrated health sciences approach, but for our relationship with the earth. So there is a very, very successful model out there. The fact that we haven't done this means that we exist in a pre-organized state. So the chemists have this understanding, and the engineers have this understanding, and the behavioralists have this understanding, and the humanists have this understanding, all about sustainability and all about the planet and all about our future, but never the twain shall meet. I mean, they haven't been brought together. our goal here is to bring all of this together. And when it's brought together, and we're in the early stages of this, we take the very successful historic School of Sustainability, the very successful Global Institute of Sustainability. None of these things are going away. They're all being brought into this structure. We could then build, and we are building, the first, if you will, medical school for the human's relationship with the earth. So that's the analogy, and we could spend hours talking about it and debating it. All I have to say to you is that there is no such thing, and we've got a lot going on, and we have a very, very stressed patient right now. The patient is the earth as the earth relates to us, and us as we relate to the earth.
Peter, anything to add to that? That's a fantastic, I think, description of this, and a great way to look at it. And it helps me actually personally look at GFL. So what do you have to add to that?
Just, to your question, does something like that exist anywhere else? And did we look at that? Clearly, we did look at our peer institutions. We did look at the international landscape. Both of us actually were involved in an experiment to do something similar at a different university. And what sets this effort apart from these other initiatives is that it is anchored in the very fundamental structure of the university. Many of our peers are starting from one of the disciplines, and that could be natural science, it could be engineering, it could be social science, it could be medical science, but they usually are covering one part of the overall puzzle. What we managed to do here is, as an architecture, to pull all these pieces together. Now, we are by far not done. We have to fill some of this architecture still with content. This is an evolutionary process. This will go on. But we have actually laid out the conditions to take on these big problems from a holistic perspective. And just to finish that part off, a major focus of what we are trying to do here is to concentrate on the role of decision-making, of human decision-making, because we are in that zone of pressure points. We have, as Michael said, a very sick patient because we made choices that led to an imbalance between humanity and the life-supporting systems. We are part of the same system. We have to get back into balance. And in order to do that, we really have to figure out how people look at that, how we can convince them that they have to make different choices, and that these different choices do not necessarily or not at all mean sacrifice, but that they have a lot of opportunity as we are looking into the future.
So I'm curious, a lot of work has gone into creating GFL. The Global Futures Initiative began in January 2018. In less than 3 years, we've had these programs, initiatives, all this expertise aligning in support of this vision. I'm curious from both of your standpoints, what have been the immediate successes, the immediate results of this? And then maybe also talk about some of the challenges.
So I'll take a stab at that. So I appreciate, Kris, you bringing up the fact that, we brought Peter here not knowing what we were going to build, which is different than, filling a deanship of a college or, another more traditional role. What we really needed was a co-architect with me, could now get into the actual process of building the intellectual scaffolding for what would become the Global Futures Laboratory. We called that the Global Futures Initiative because we didn't know where this was going to end up. And in the last 2 years, we've really come to, I think, a very powerful design, which is to take the Global Institute of Sustainability and empower that by calling it now and expanding its thoughts to the Global Institute of Sustainability and Innovation, creating then 2 schools to run parallel, all of which we'd been incubating in different ways, 3 schools total to work in the College of Global Futures, the Walton Sustainability Solutions activity. And so as well as other networks, other activities, other things that we're doing, the concentration of the decision theater within GFL and so forth. So now what we have is we're in the earliest implementation phases of this Global Futures Laboratory. The results thus far, other than creating confusion among our faculty, which we've also done, and I'll come back to that in a second, the results have been to actually plot a course, create a scaffolding, and begin the building process. So we have decided to launch a new school for complexity, a very powerful thing, a new college for global futures, with 3 schools. I mean, nobody else in the world is doing these things. Tie all these things together, create a new kind of structure within the institution, attract people, attract resources, which we are doing. The complexities along the way are largely surrounding our faculty in the following sense. They're surrounding our faculty because our faculty are like, well, what is this? You know, I'm sitting here in the School of Molecular Sciences or the School of Earth and Space Exploration. You know, we've given Peter multiple roles within the institution, coordinating, finding a way to coordinate among many different schools and departments across existing college structures. Because, this is, by the way that medical schools started and the way that they evolved over time, as well as then coordinating between research activities, solutions activities, and so forth, and bring as well as then launching a new college. And so people say, well, what are we doing? What are we building? And that's largely because, and faculty, you know, it can be understood that they see things this way. It's like, well, what's wrong with the existing structure? What's wrong with the way that things really, really are? And I say, it's hard for me to express with as much emotion as I have behind this. Look at where the existing structure has gotten us. We have an ignorant, illiterate population incapable of understanding the spread of a global pandemic. We have a population of politicians and others who do not understand where we are in terms of managing the planet. We have people who have inadequate tools, inadequate models, no understanding whatsoever. So clearly, whatever we've been doing has been inadequate. And I'm the first to put basically assessment on ourselves. Cold, calculating assessment. What have we done wrong? One of the things that we've done wrong is that we haven't built something the equivalent of medical schools related to our relationship with the planet, something as powerful, as broad, as broadly scoped. And so we're in the very early stages of being the first out of the box to build what we really need to build. And so the complexities here, or the difficulties, have been everybody rightfully sitting around saying, you know, what the hell? What is all this? I don't understand what any of this is. And there was a lot of that went on during medical school formation also. And so what we're trying to do is incrementally move in this direction by bringing people and rallying them around the moment in time that we are. We're in a moment in time that if we do not derive the right people, the right knowledge, the right know-how, the right communication streams, the right ways to communicate, the right solutions, we're going to see disruptions that make this global pandemic seem like a picnic by comparison. And that's really hard for people to grasp.
Yeah, and Michael, I would just add to that, and maybe Peter, this is for you. I mean, I would put a slightly a rosier lens on it, and say that perhaps, and Peter, maybe you can tell me both of you can tell me if I'm wrong about this. I mean, we started something, you, Michael, started something at ASU that allows us to be much more nimble than any other higher education institution, perhaps in the world. And we've seen amazing recent examples of that with our COVID-19 testing, our partnership to try to, you know, get Arizona in a better situation on COVID-19 testing. I could go down the list of successes that have occurred, and that now maybe this GFL institution is a way to take that nimbleness and take that and advance it and give the faculty who are and staff who are doing these amazing things even more opportunity. But
I think, Kris, that's a brilliant point, and I think I appreciate you bringing me back to the fact that we couldn't even be thinking about this design,
right?
Except for the successes that GEOS has seen, except for the successes that we've seen in the School of Sustainability, and the other schools and the other programs and the other activities. And so that is actually what empowered us to think that we had enough wherewithal and enough capacity and enough know-how and enough of the right people, hundreds and hundreds of faculty members, that we could actually launch the Global Futures Laboratory and have some chance of pulling it off, which is, I think, only the result of the achievements that we've had up to this point.
Yeah, exactly. And Peter, as someone who came recently from Columbia, can you speak to that point that ASU is perhaps uniquely positioned to do this and to be able to take the structure that President Crow and others have been building for the last 15, 20 years to this next level?
So
I mean, you're still a little bit of an outsider, so you see how things go at sort of more moribund institutions than ours.
yeah, absolutely, still learning. But the idea to create that structure was there from the very beginning. The question was, how would we get to it? And there I have to say, compared to institutions I have been at and that I know, ASU is a unique setting that allows, for example, bringing together all disciplines. It's not just the natural sciences, engineering sciences, maybe medical sciences, public health, etc., but the social sciences and humanities here are really not just willing to follow, but they're willing to get into a leadership role in understanding where the human choices have led us, and what do we understand about them, and how can we make different choices, and what will it take to get into a different future. Clearly, the experiments that were done early on when Michael came from Columbia to ASU in 2002, within 2 years, and that shows something about the speed at which things are done here. The Global Institute of Sustainability was founded 2 years later, the School of Sustainability. At that time, everybody else was actually struggling with the concept, can you build a school around something that's not really an accepted discipline? But here, ASU was very pragmatic and just did that experiment. And then in 2012, the World Sustainability Solutions Service as a practice arm, so to speak, was added. So there were clearly, tremendous anchor points without which Global Futures Laboratory could not have been envisioned and could not have been built. And the willingness and the preparedness of faculty to engage in these kind of new structures, in these kind of experiments with academic structures, really opened the way to build the architecture of the Global Futures Laboratory, put the first design down, move from a school to a college, add a new school to it, which I think complexity is something that without understanding of complexity, we really cannot tackle most of the questions that we are facing. And so all of that actually was prepared, but then, people went along with it and helped build that. So that is the difference to many of the institutions that I know, where it was extremely difficult to bring all these disciplines together and bring them around a big idea like this one. And I have to say, this idea, I mean, if it would be triggered by COVID, you would say, yeah, that's a natural thing, because COVID really woke us up. It was a big shock that laid open all the interconnectivity, all the fragility of many of the systems. But we actually anticipating things like that, not exactly knowing what would happen. Nobody would have predicted when exactly COVID would hit, but we knew that these kind of things were in store for us. So we were a few years ahead of that. And I think that speaks to the capacity of ASU to allow big visions go forward, even if they are not fully defined in all their detail. There is the willingness of the leadership to let these experiments with structures go forward and then be adaptive along the way and fill it and modify it in an evolutionary sense as we are moving into the full implementation.
So kind of along these lines, Michael and Peter, I think a lot of people are wondering, how specifically GFL can help faculty, staff, students take their work and their future plans beyond to a higher level. So do you have any sort of concrete examples of how this new structure is going to actually help do that?
Well, let me just make one last point, and then I'll go to this how to help faculty. because I'll probably have perhaps a different view than Peter. So within a 750-mile circle of our location is the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory with thousands of employees, the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory with thousands of employees, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, also with thousands, the Sandia National Laboratory, the Los Alamos National Laboratory, the NASA Ames Research Center with 2,500 employees, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in Golden, Colorado. These all have thousands and thousands and thousands of people. Very, very smart people. None of them are focused on the future of the relationship between our species and the planet as their sole theme. None of them. None of them are going to move in that direction. No one is going to build one. So we're building it. So when you ask me, Kris, what are we going to do to help our faculty? You know, I'm like, okay, yeah, we're going to help our faculty, but how about our faculty coming together to think about, you know, what they can do as individual scholars and individual teachers and individual creators and individual geniuses, but now also in addition to that, what they can now do together that they couldn't do in the smaller groups and in the smaller communities that perhaps they were working in the past. Now we've made a lot of progress in this space. So, you know, what we're going to be offering is, and what we're going to find are major projects. We don't know why we're sitting around here. All these other labs, this is no joke, several of them have billions of dollars per year, billions. And so we're looking for projects that are $500 million that would involve 400 faculty members and 2,000 graduate students. You know, we're looking for the scale of work necessary to actually take on some of these problems. And so the opportunities, what we're hoping that we're going to create for faculty are opportunities to operate in mega projects, opportunities to become involved in really, really important stuff at scale, opportunities to team in new ways and to work in new ways. And yes, we have a lot of that going on, but that's what we're looking for. And also in the case of the new College for Global Futures, which is a part of this laboratory, the other thing these other laboratories have is they decided to leave education out. They have like peripheral relationships. This is a central relationship of the laboratory itself for these colleges to produce uniquely educated individuals through sustainability, through the School for the Future of Innovation and Society, and through the Emerging School for Complexity, and then what lies at the college level among and between all of them. So unique people production, unique problem solving, unique team building, as well as scale, big projects, large scale projects, multi-year projects, multi-decadal projects. That's what it's going to take to make these kinds of global futures impacts be more positive.
Yeah, and Peter, to that point, I think it is very much a two-way street. It's, you know, how can this new laboratory assist ASU faculty, staff, and students take their work to the next step, but also the reverse of that, which is how can we work together to maximize our impact and to take our already interdisciplinary approach, which is quite extraordinary and very unique, beyond. So can you speak to that and that part of the vision here?
Yeah, and I don't think there's any disagreement with Michael on what we try to do here and how we might get to it. A lot of the issues that we have to solve need scale, and this a fundamental design element of the Global Futures Laboratory is that it can be scaled, not just within ASU, but also through our networks across the globe. The problems that we are facing, for example, is to keep the planet cool, meaning below a warming of about 2 degrees Celsius, maybe 1.5 if we are really lucky, but that, you know, we have to see if we can manage that. That needs not just the technology where we are leading as an institution, but it also more and more needs thought about the entire issue of energy system transformation, all the issues that are related to that. And you know that firsthand, Kris, justice, equality in these transitions, timescales of the transitions. Another example is, how do we actually figure out how to create support tools for decision making? So the decision theater is something that was revolutionary when it was founded, still is, but it has to be driven now to a higher level of capacity. And for example, adding an entire school that deals with complexity is one element that will help with these kind of efforts. If you look at Phoenix, where we are living, or the Valley, a lot of issues that have to be addressed that need close engagement with those who are making the decisions, as do virtually all the issues that we are dealing with. So that really brings all the disciplines around the university together, but on a scale, and importantly on a time scale, that we have to accelerate, because we are literally running out of time on many fronts. And that urgency is another element that is a design feature of the laboratory, that we have to manage to turn things around faster. We have to leave the trajectory of knowledge production that traditional academic institutions have, because the problems around us are developing faster than we are used to in terms of our knowledge dissemination and the production that goes with it. So that is another element where we put that into the architecture, that we are able to respond to the magnitude, complexity, and the time scale of the problems around us.
Yeah, and I will say,
Kris, I just want to add something on scale. So there's these 4 elements of scale. Intellectual scale. So we're at an insufficient intellectual scale to take on the problems of global climate change and planetary management and global futures. No matter what we think how smart we are, we're not there yet. So intellectual scale, we need intellectual scale to be capable of high speed changes. We need multimodal and adjustable intellectual scale, and we need breadth of problem solving capability and breadth of scientific perspective. Just because you understand how atoms work and molecules work doesn't mean that from that by itself we can derive the solutions. The second scale is networking scale. We have no central convening forces to bring people together. Right now we have central convening forces to tell us what the problem is and to tell us that we need to have a treaty to solve it. Okay, that's good. So what? What are you going to do if you can't alter people's behavior? What are you going to do if you can't derive solutions? What are you going to do with the economic models that we have? The third scale is impact scale. Yes, we want every faculty member to be able to have the scale that they have within their discipline, within their field, and so forth and so on. But we already know that that's insufficient, or we wouldn't be sitting where we are. All of the journals are full. All of the science is now known. Okay, now what? And so and the last scale is Peter's point, which is time scale. We are moving at a speed which is almost ensuring that we will have catastrophic outcomes related to global climate change because we couldn't figure out how to move intellectually more quickly. We, the universities, couldn't figure out how to move more quickly.
Well, I will say, and I think that's really interesting, Michael, that, in my conversations with some large funders and with people who are interested in this topic, they are increasingly noticing ASU's, emphasis on speed, on scale, and especially on impact. They want to see that, and then and on our relationships with communities that I think other universities just don't necessarily have.
That's where the impact is felt. It's felt on the community level up.
Absolutely.
So even in COVID, by the way, we're about to learn what not being fast is all about. We still are not in front of the curve. We are still behind the curve, and we're about to learn what that does, because we are incapable of moving quickly enough.
So speaking of moving quickly, I need to move along to questions from the community. So we've got a lot of amazing questions. I want to start with one from Greg Asner. He says, what's your advice for existing school directors and faculty to get involved? Can we work to change the metrics of impact and contribution to help faculty and staff focus on true collaboration, i.e. tenure and promotion? And I've heard that question come up before.
Well, I mean, that's one of the reasons that we embedded a college inside this laboratory. And one of the reasons that in Peter's role as vice provost for Global Futures Laboratory, he has a coordinating responsibility for several schools. I don't know that the schools fully grasp this yet, or if we've gotten to full implementation yet, but the notion, Greg, to your question is, we want to be able to affect and impact all those things. And the traditional models are obviously inadequate. So I know that as as president of the university, I'm very open to new models, new ways to generate the kinds of behaviors that we need, the kind of excellence that we need, the kind of outcomes that we need. And that's why we've brought all of this together. That's why we've designed Peter's role in the way that we have designed it, is so that he can help bring the faculty together to think about new ways to do things.
And I just want to add the following thing. If we are not, we have now moved the structure for studying and the trajectories into the future and thinking about how we actually can influence that to a point where we actually are forced to, if I mean, that was on our mind anyway, but if it wouldn't have been, we would be forced to rethink criteria for promotion, tenure, and hiring in terms of more impact-oriented, or finding a balanced portfolio of criteria that would count when we are evaluating people's trajectories and careers.
I'll just add that medical schools have mastered this in many ways, imperfectly, but nonetheless, I mean, they have. When I was at Columbia, where Peter was also, we had 7,000 faculty associated with our medical school. Clinical faculty, every kind of faculty member that you could possibly imagine, whole new ways to bring teams together. And that's not the way that the rest of the university worked. And it's not the way yet that this university works, but it is a way that the Global Futures Laboratory could work.
And sort of relatedly, how about humanities, innovation, and complexity? Sort of how does that factor into GFL, into all of this?
Well, what I'll say, and Peter already mentioned it, we have fantastic humanists here. They are fantastic within their own disciplines, but then they're also unbelievably open and committed and focused on these exact same things. And so one of the flaws that we have that most people don't understand is that the scientists can apparently say all they want about where the world is going, and no one's listening to them. No one's listening. Well, that's obviously a cultural issue, a complex human motivation issue, a complex historical issue. If we don't figure out how to speak in ways in which the average human understands and can interpret and can make judgments and assessments, we will never solve this problem, ever. And the humanities are not the only way to move in that direction, but they're a central part of it. How do we figure out what it is about us as a species that causes us to be so self-destructive, for instance?
As many of the audience know, I'm trained as a natural scientist, as a physicist. But as I moved from physics to environmental physics, environmental science, earth engineering, sustainable development, and global futures, along the way, early on, it became clear to me that while we have to understand these systems, while we have to have very strong programs in the natural sciences, in engineering, and so on, they are necessary but not sufficient. If we cannot bring the humanities, social sciences, the arts, all the other disciplines into the mix to understand what in shorthand I sometimes call societal will is, how it forms, how it can be changed, how you can incentivize people to see what is happening around them, and how they could actually make choices that would take some of the pressure off, that would leave more choices for the future, that would leave more choices for future generations, then we would fail. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind. And we are actually seeing that the younger generation is getting that. You look at Fridays for Future, you look at many of the initiatives that are moving, that are being created along the same lines. The young generation does understand that we are narrowing their option space. And fully understandably, that's not something they want to accept. So in my view, often, and that was already when I worked at Columbia and the US Institute, but also here, I see one big part of creating Global Futures Lab as creating a platform for the next generations to fully fill it out. I think many of us can facilitate that. We can drive it a certain way, but the full potential, in my view, can only be reached by the younger generations, because they are thinking differently. They are doing things that we envision, that we hope for, that we dream of, but they can do them if we give them the space to follow their own, ideas, to follow their own thoughts, and not constrict them in the traditional vertical structures of academia.
Yeah, let me say something about philosophy. So we have 8 billion people across thousands of cultures and tens of thousands of subcultures and hundreds of thousands of subcultures within those cultures. I don't think that there's ever been a philosopher that's ever imagined the complexity of the world and the codependency of the world that we presently depend on. There's people that have conceptualized it, but do we have the right philosophical tools? Do we have the right tools for understanding this whole concept of liberalism, capital L, the idea of the individual and individual liberty? Are there limits to individual liberty? Are there not individual liberties? How do you protect the liberty of someone that hasn't been born yet, 5 generations into the future, that you help impact the outcome of that person's liberty? We're without the scale of thought necessary to advance this global futures laboratory without everyone, philosophers, historians, artists, as Peter has suggested. And we've got to find a way, which isn't very easy because we're not organized this way. The level of lack of understanding and lack of respect in academia in general, among and between these fields, is appalling. And so the other thing that we thought through this structure was that we could bring people together in all of this and see what we could get going in a new way.
And yet I think that we have, Michael, created the culture at ASU that allows it to happen. And it is happening, I think, at a level
Yes.
that doesn't
Yeah,
exist.
my comments are the rationale of why we're doing what we've been doing at ASU for the last 15 years against everybody else.
Yeah.
You know, when we started the School of Sustainability, people told us no one would ever hire anyone from such a stupid school. And so here we are. So that's why so many academics coming in from other places. This is one of our biggest problems at ASU. Yes, we're a university, but we don't look, feel, smell, or act like other universities. So people show up and they say, what is this? I've never heard of there being a college inside a laboratory, a university laboratory related to global futures, trying to tie together hundreds of faculty members. Why are they doing this? I just want to do my own thing. You know,
Right.
I just want to be my own person and do my own thing and make my own contribution. And so we at our culture are past that enough that we thought that we could launch this. Absolutely.
Being a little bit more positive than Michael, I have to say that when we launched and when we announced, the response from the outside was extremely positive. There are a lot of people out there who wish they could actually move into a similar direction. Doesn't have to be exactly what we are doing, but who, you know, see the aspiration, who see the approach, who see the goal, and who are actually reacting very positively to it. So hopefully
we're
that
try
will
to
pick
hire as
up.
many of them as we can.
Yeah. Well, and I think in terms of results for students, you know, my experience is that the students who graduate from ASU are far more prepared for the job market than other students coming out of other universities because of the experience that they can get as a result of this culture. So, but let me ask you a question from our listeners, kind of in this vein, but how will diverse knowledge systems, including the indigenous ecological knowledge systems of living communities and native leaders, be incorporated at the foundational level of GFL?
Well, I'll give you one example of a project that we're looking at now, which is the designing of a global conservation curriculum that would be built around indigenous logic and indigenous peoples and indigenous teachers and indigenous instructors, because, you know, we've made probably close to a fatal error by abandoning what I call traditional science and indigenous science and thinking that only modern Western science is the only thing that's got the tools that we need to move forward. It doesn't, and it isn't. And so Global Futures Laboratory means, and from my perspective, Peter, you can comment on this, it means bringing in every tool, every community, every idea. And then on top of that, we know that, you know, a quarter of the Earth's surface where conservation is most importantly being managed is our areas of the planet managed by indigenous peoples. And so if we don't learn from each other and then birth a new way of teaching and learning, then we will have failed.
No, I mean, the kind of problems that we are trying to address really only can be, you know, successfully be treated if we combine knowledge systems. We cannot rely on the academic knowledge system as the ultimate source of wisdom. We have to bring in knowledge systems from, importantly, indigenous people, but also from the private sector, from the general public, from political decision makers, etc. So we really, and that's how we designed one of the spaces, the engagement space, that is still in evolution, that we are still thinking through how to optimize, has the purpose of combining these knowledge systems and making sure that we are not focusing too much on the academic knowledge production, but that we are understanding that these other sources of knowledge, long traditions, a lot of insight are coming in and play the adequate role in addressing, where we are heading.
I want to be sure to get these questions in about sort of outcomes and tracking success. One person asked, how will GFL outcomes be tracked and evaluated?
Well, I mean, there'll be outcomes tracked and evaluated on many different levels. The quality of the students that we produce across the 3 schools within the college, the solutions that we deliver and their impact, the scientific breakthroughs that we have that lead to whole new perspectives, the technologies that we invent and deploy, the new philosophies that change the way politicians think about how they make decisions. I mean, we're looking to be measuring all of those things in every case. And so we're going to track everything, measure everything, study everything, and that's what we do. That's who we are.
I think for some of the, as Michael pointed out, for some of the activities that we have, we actually have metrics that we can follow. But there's also the need to develop new metrics, because we are actually producing knowledge in different ways, and there is no blueprint that we could easily follow. But just to take one example of what would be a big success, if we really could scale up in time the technology to re-extract CO2 from the atmosphere, so that we can actually, together with the emission cuts, get carbon neutral by roughly the middle of the century, that would be a huge success. And so these are the kind of things that, in addition to measuring everything on each of the components, that are sort of the overarching outcomes that we have to look at increasingly and say, this really made a difference for the global society, and actually society from local to global scales.
Michael, thank you, Peter. Michael, to your point, Mauricio Mejia says, I love our GFL initiative. I wonder whether politicians would use the outcomes of our work, how the GFL would be in a better position to persuade them to take action. So, lots of folks.
Mauricio, that's my middle name, by the way. And I wouldn't worry about too much about the politicians you see standing in front of you in the present configuration of the arguments going on in democracies around the world, which are seeing the rise of demagogues and fear and all kinds of other things. I'm speaking more broadly than the United States. We have to be bigger than that. We have to be giving to rising politicians, to emerging corporate leaders, everyone, the tools that they need. This is the thing that I say all the time. I think, Mauricio, you get this. The reason we're not making better decisions and the reason that we're not able to tackle this problem is that we within the academy have not given them the tools that they need. You might think they have the tools. They don't have the tools. They don't have the understanding. They don't have the optionality. We haven't given that to them. And woe on us because we haven't. And now we're seeing some of the fruits of that, some of the negative outcomes associated with that. So I think that we can do this. We just have to figure out how to do it in a much better way than we've done to get out of the box that we're in right now.
And there are actually examples where we are making impact. If we are just looking at the more local regional side, the Knowledge Exchange for Resilient, Healthy Urban Environment projects are actually engaging with politicians. On the global side, coming to the private sector that Michael mentioned, we are engaging with an initiative that does board education, educating board members about all these issues, so that is that's on their mind and in their knowledge, in the knowledge portfolio when they make these decisions. And we are also engaging in a big way with companies to change their way they look at the future and their footprints, but also how they can actually move forward, and in a way that quite frequently now is called planet positive, meaning that we are not putting more pressure onto the planet, but that we are taking pressure off.
So imagine that we then can derive the solutions, the people, the know-how, the tools to help every major corporation to be planet positive. They have a net positive impact on the planet themselves. There are dozens of companies that want to do this and several that we're working with on a very intimate basis. And so, Mauricio, that gives us sort of this sense that there are people that want to listen. The people that don't want to listen, we don't spend a lot of time on them. We're going to spend our time on those that want to listen, and then we're going to show the solution. Then those that don't want to listen, they'll be irrelevant at that point.
It sounds like we're getting a lot of interest from the units outside of GFL in what GFL is and is up to. And this is from Mark Roseland. How can faculty who are outside the core GFL units best contribute to the GFL?
Well, I'll give a quick answer, and then Peter, you should answer this. And so the Global Institute for Sustainability and Innovations is open right now, is that hundreds of faculty members are participating in the discovery aspect of what we're doing. And that's open for self-selection and joining. I mean, you join, and then you become a part of the network, and we're going to be continuing to evolve the network. Then we're also going to be looking for courses and initiatives and assets and tools moving forward. So there's room for all the faculty around the institution that want to be a part of this. Peter?
Yeah, the way I look at that is that the Global Futures Laboratory is a central unit, but it has to radiate throughout the university. Otherwise, we cannot, it has to be very transparent. Otherwise, we cannot reach these goals. And that is actually in the architecture. It might not yet have been fully implemented, but for example, in the learning space, we don't just have 3 schools in a college. There are clearly, strong relationships to virtually all the schools of ASU. As Michael mentioned, on the discovery side, we have the Global Institute of Sustainability and Innovation as an anchor point, but that's completely open, and there are many leads of the centers who are not faculty members in the college. So that will be enhanced as we are moving forward. We are still in the, as Michael said at the very beginning, in the initial implementation phase. So all of these thoughts that you're bringing up are really, welcome. And as you find, if you have a way that you want to engage, we are absolutely open. This is not something that's owned by a small group. This is something that has to be co-owned by the entire university and beyond. Otherwise, we will not succeed.
So Mark, you and I are in the same college, and so there's lots of room for people from Watts College to be involved in all these activities, from the design of communities to the design of public policy to everything, how we interface in urban environments, the building of urban environments, everything.
Michael and Peter, I'd like you to maybe incorporate the answer to this question in your final comments, because we need to wrap up here. But could you speak to whether there are any exciting partnerships or GFL level funding to share with the group? Anything that sort of is happening now that you think that people ought to know about? And just
well, what I'll say is that I'm looking for the $500 million to $1 billion contributor, and there's a lot of energy going into that, and there's possibilities of partnerships at that level. And so that's what I'm doing, and Peter's a part of that. And then Peter, you can talk about what you're doing. We don't think there's going to be resource constraints. We think there's going to be constraints about people, sort of operating in this new modality, where there's, really large opportunities, really huge things that we can work together on, and teams that have never been formed before, that kind of thing. That's what I think is where people are. It's not going to be lack of resources. It's going to be, can you really get with it? Peter?
Great number that Michael threw out, 500 million. But for some people that might sound utopic. But if you look at philanthropy, there are actually individual donors who give $1 billion plus. So that is something where Michael clearly has the lead on, and it's really an amazing thing that this kind of attention is being paid to this field. Let me just, in closing, touch on 2 things. We also are successful in fundraising along the lines of, proposals, group proposals. So just one example, and I cannot go into the details of all of that, but during the past 2 to 3 months, we had 6 large projects that ended up in bringing in 17 million or so on that integrated level of the laboratory. Also, I want to quickly mention ISTB 7. because that is something that is an absolute unique feature of the Global Futures Laboratory. There is absolutely no place around the globe where a major research building, a state-of-the-art facility, 280,000 square feet, LEED Platinum, is dedicated as the headquarters of such an initiative. Now, it is the center, but it has to radiate out throughout the rest of the university. It's not that we are closing up in that thing. That has to be open. That has to be really transparent. It has to be a physical location from which we reach throughout the rest of the university. But having that headquarters, bringing a lot of people close together, that opportunity I never saw anywhere around the globe.
All right, thank you both. Thank you, President Crow and Dr. Schlosser. It's been a fascinating conversation, and I personally cannot wait to see how GFL builds on the success of schools like the School of Sustainability, which I've been involved with. It's been my honor to be a part of for the last 10 years. And I'm really excited about the amount of impact that ASU can have at a global scale, and that I know we will have. So I'm going to turn it over to Jason Franz to close this out.
Thank you, Kris, and thank you, President Crow and Dr. Schlosser, for this great conversation. We have captured all the questions that were submitted, so anything that we were not able to address in person or during this course, we will look to address and get back to the people who submitted those. As well as I want to remind everybody that we have our follow-up town hall next Friday, November 6th, where we will go over operations and research support. And we will also be accepting questions at that time. Again, thank you to everyone for attending. We will have the recording of this presentation available as soon as it is ready, most likely on Monday. And we hope that everybody has a great weekend. Thank you.